I'm Margaret Collins, 62, and I thought retiring to my beach house would finally bring me peace. Then my daughter-in-law called. My parents are too old. They'll stay with you since you do nothing anyway. I didn't refuse. But when they arrived, they found a surprise that would change everything forever. Before I tell you what happened next, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any part of this incredible story. The gulls woke me before the sun did. I'd grown to love that sound. Sharp, insistent, unapologetic. It cut through the pre-dawn silence like a promise that the world was still turning, still breathing, still offering second chances to women like me. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I padded toward the kitchen, cool and familiar. My modest beach house in Cape May wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled perpetually of salt and coffee, a living room whose windows framed the Atlantic like a painting that changed every hour. But it was mine. Every crooked nail, every sun-bleached curtain, every shell I'd collected on my morning walks. 35 years I'd given to teaching literature. 35 years of conjugating verbs and explaining metaphors to teenagers who thought Shakespeare was a brand of energy drink. I loved it. God, I loved it. But there's a particular exhaustion that comes from pouring yourself into others until you're hollow. Daniel had been gone 20 years now. Heart attack at 44. Sudden as lightning. Our son Michael was barely 10. I remember standing at the funeral in a black dress I'd borrowed, holding Michael's small, trembling hand, and thinking, how do I do this alone? Somehow I did. Michael grew up strong and kind, married Olivia, gave me 2 beautiful grandchildren I barely saw anymore. He'd moved to Charlotte for work. Life had pulled him into its current. As it does, I understood. I never blamed him for the distance. But after he left, after retirement loomed, I realized something terrifying. I had no idea who Margaret Collins was when she wasn't teaching, when she wasn't mothering, when she wasn't surviving. So I bought this house. I'd saved for years, squirreling away small amounts from every paycheck. It wasn't beachfront. I couldn't afford that. But it was close enough to hear the waves at night, close enough to taste the ocean in the morning air. The coffee maker gurgled to life. I pulled my cardigan tighter and stepped onto the back porch, mug warming my palms. The horizon was beginning to blush pink and gold. Somewhere down the beach, a dog barked. A jogger passed, nodding politely. Peace. That's what I'd come here for. In the week since I'd arrived, I'd established a routine. Morning walks along the shoreline, collecting sand dollars and bits of sea glass. Afternoons reading on the porch, Steinbeck, Austen, Morrison, all the books I'd taught but never truly had time to savor. Evenings cooking recipes I'd bookmarked for decades. Coq au vin, homemade pasta, blueberry muffins that made the whole house smell like summer. I'd met some neighbors. Mary, a widow like me, who sold the most incredible cakes at the farmer's market. Tom, a retired fisherman with a face like weathered driftwood and jokes that were terrible, but somehow still made you laugh. Sophie, a young mother raising her son alone after a brutal divorce. Working 2 jobs and still finding time to smile. They'd invited me to things. Community dinners, beach cleanups, a book club that met at the library every Thursday. I'd said yes to all of it for the first time in decades. I felt the edges of myself softening, the constant vigilance of single motherhood, the performance of classroom authority. It was all melting away, leaving something raw and real underneath. This is what I deserve, I thought, watching the sun crest the water, this quiet, this simplicity, this life that asks nothing of me. I went inside to make blueberry muffins. The batter was just coming together. Flour, sugar, butter folding into blue-purple swirls. When my phone rang, I almost didn't answer. It was too early for telemarketers, too early for anything good. But the screen said, Olivia, my daughter-in-law, Michael's wife. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked up. Margaret, she said, her voice syrup-sweet and razor-sharp all at once. I need your help. Something in my chest tightened. This wasn't going to be good. Margaret, Olivia said again, when I didn't respond immediately. Are you there? I'm here. I set down the wooden spoon, watching blueberry batter drip back into the bowl like tiny purple tears. Good. Listen, I'll get straight to the point. I know you're busy with your retirement and everything. Busy, the word hung there. weightless, and somehow condescending. My parents, she continued, her voice shifting into that practiced tone she used in boardrooms. They're getting older. Dad's 70 now. Mom's 68. They can't live alone anymore. And honestly, Michael and I just don't have the space or the time. You know how it is. The kids, my career, the house. I knew where this was going. My fingers tightened around the phone. I thought maybe, since you're living alone now, and you have all that time, and you're not really doing much, there it was. Not really doing much. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything I'd built for myself these past weeks. The morning walks, the books, the slow, deliberate reconstruction of a life that was mine alone. Not really doing much, as if 35 years of shaping young minds meant nothing, as if raising a son alone after my husband's heart gave out meant nothing, as if this piece I'd scraped together from decades of sacrifice was just empty space waiting to be filled with someone else's needs. Margaret, Olivia's voice sharpened. Are you listening? I'm listening. So I was thinking they could stay with you, just temporarily. Of course, just until we figure out something more permanent. You've got that extra bedroom. And honestly, it would be doing us such a huge favor. They're a handful. Dad complains about everything. And Mom has very specific ideas about how things should be done. I should have said no. Every instinct screamed it, but something else stirred beneath the anger. Something quieter, older, wiser, a teacher's instinct. Maybe. The part of me that had spent decades recognizing teachable moments, seeing past teenage bravado to the insecurity beneath. Olivia wasn't asking for help. She was testing me, proving that I was exactly what she'd always thought. Convenient, expendable, easily dismissed. And sometimes the most powerful response isn't the one people expect. Of course, Olivia, I heard myself say, my voice steady as lighthouse beams. You can bring them. Silence on the other end. Actual, stunned silence. You, really? When were you thinking? I was going to try to convince you, but this weekend, would that work? This weekend is perfect. More silence. I could almost hear the gears shifting in her mind, recalculating, trying to find the angle she'd missed. Okay, wow, thank you, Margaret. This really helps us out. I'll text you when we're on our way. Drive safely. I hung up before she could say anything else. The kitchen was suddenly too quiet. The muffin batter sat forgotten, deflating slowly. Outside, the gulls continued their morning arguments, oblivious to the small earthquake that had just restructured my life. Not really doing much. I let myself feel it then. The full weight of the insult. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and unwelcome. I gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. 20 years I'd been alone. 20 years of being both mother and father. 20 years of parent-teacher conferences, where I sat on both sides of the table in my mind, of birthday parties I planned solo, of midnight fevers and broken hearts, and college applications and all the tiny, enormous moments that make up a life. And now, after finally claiming space for myself, I was not really doing much, but as the tears came, something else came with them. Clarity, Olivia, had given me an opportunity. Not the one she intended, but an opportunity nonetheless. She expected me to fail, expected her parents to be too difficult, too demanding, expected me to call within a week, apologizing, begging them to take Harold and Nancy back. She expected me to prove that I was exactly as useless as she implied, which meant I could surprise her. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and picked up my phone. 3 quick texts. Mary, need your help with something. Coffee tomorrow, Tom. Got a favor to ask. You free this week, Sophie? Community dinner this Friday. Can we make it special? 3 responses came within minutes. All variations of course. That's the thing about real community. It doesn't question. It doesn't judge. It just shows up. I returned to the muffin batter, adding fresh berries, folding them in with renewed purpose. As I slid the pan into the oven, I looked out the window at the Atlantic. Gray, blue, and infinite. My mother used to say that the ocean teaches patience, that it reshapes coastlines slowly, grain by grain, wave by wave, not through force, but through persistence. Harold and Nancy were coming. They would arrive with their judgments and expectations, their complaints, and their carefully constructed walls, and I would do what the ocean does, I would be patient, persistent, inevitable. By the time they left, if they left, they wouldn't be the same people who arrived. Neither would Olivia. The timer dinged. The muffins emerged, golden brown, fragrant, perfect. I smiled. Let the transformation begin. The black SUV pulled up exactly on time. Olivia was nothing if not punctual. I'd spent the morning preparing. Fresh flowers in the guest room, clean towels folded on the bed, a pitcher of lemonade sweating on the kitchen counter. The house smelled of lemon polish and the lingering sweetness of yesterday's muffins. From my porch, I watched 3 doors open simultaneously. Harold Miller emerged first, unfolding himself from the passenger seat, with the careful movements of a man unused to uncertainty. He wore a light linen suit despite the casual setting, his silver hair precisely combed. His eyes swept across my modest house with the clinical assessment of someone accustomed to appraising value. And finding it lacking, Nancy followed, a vision of controlled elegance. Pearl necklace catching the sunlight, cream-colored blouse without a single wrinkle. Her gaze was sharper than her husband's, cutting through the weathered shingles and peeling paint to judge not just the house, but me. I recognized that look. I'd seen it at school functions, at Michael's wedding. The look that said, "You're less than I expected." Olivia emerged last, phone already pressed to her ear, gesturing with her free hand. She wore heels on my gravel driveway, impractical, deliberate, a power move even here. I descended the porch steps, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Welcome." Olivia covered her phone's microphone. "Margaret, hi, sorry. Conference call running late." She glanced at the house, her smile tightening. "It's quaint. I hope they'll be comfortable. It's certainly more rustic than I remembered." More rustic than I remembered. She'd never been here before. "They'll be just fine," I said evenly. Harold approached, extending a hand with the mechanical courtesy of countless business meetings. His grip was firm, brief, dismissive. "Mrs. Collins, appreciate you taking us in on such short notice. Taking us in as if they were refugees, not guests. As if I were a shelter, not family. It's Margaret, and you're welcome here as long as you need." Nancy stepped forward, her heels clicking against the stone path. She didn't offer a handshake. Instead, she lifted her sunglasses, revealing eyes the color of steel. What a charming location. Very isolated. Peaceful, I corrected gently. She looked toward the beach, where gulls wheeled and dove. I suppose that's one word for it. Olivia ended her call with an efficient, "I'll handle it Monday," and turned to us. All business. "Okay, so Dad, Mom, your bags are in the trunk. Margaret's got the guest room ready. I really need to get back on the road before traffic gets worse." "You're not staying for lunch?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Can't conference prep tomorrow, and Michael's got the kids until 6. She popped the trunk, pulled out 2 expensive-looking suitcases. "You'll call if there are any problems." She directed the question at me, but her eyes flicked toward her parents, a look that said, "When there are problems, everything will be fine," I assured her. Olivia kissed the air beside each of her parents' cheeks, the way people do at galas and fundraisers. "Love you both, behave yourselves," she laughed, but it rang hollow. Then she was in the SUV, phone already back to her ear, reversing down my driveway without a backward glance. The 3 of us stood in the suddenly loud silence. The ocean filled the space where goodbyes should have been. "Well," Harold said finally, "shall we see this guest room?" I led them inside. Their reactions were subtle but unmistakable. Nancy's barely perceptible wrinkle of her nose at the simple furniture. Harold's pause at the bookshelf crowded with worn paperbacks instead of leather-bound classics. The guest room was small but bright, windows facing the ocean. I'd put my best quilt on the bed, the one my mother made, set out fresh soap and extra blankets. Nancy touched the quilt with one fingertip. "How homey," another word that meant its opposite. Harold opened the closet, found it empty save for a few extra hangers. "Sufficient," he declared as if grading a hotel room. "Bathrooms across the hall," I said. "Towels in the cabinet, dinner's at 6 if you're hungry, but help yourselves to anything in the kitchen whenever you'd like." "What's for dinner?" Nancy asked, settling onto the bed's edge without actually relaxing. "Grilled shrimp, fresh salad, white wine." Harold made a sound that might have been approval or might have been dyspepsia. I'm not fond of seafood that tastes too oceanic. I'll be sure to season it well. They unpacked while I returned to the kitchen, giving them space. Through the window, I could see them moving through the guest room like chess pieces. Careful, strategic, maintaining distance even in proximity. That evening I set the patio table as the sun began its descent. Golden light turned the ocean into hammered bronze. The shrimp sizzled on the grill. Filling the air with garlic and lemon, Harold and Nancy joined me reluctantly, like teenagers summoned to a family dinner they didn't want to attend. We ate to the soundtrack of waves and Harold's complaints. The shrimp was too lemony. The wine was adequate. The sunset was directly in my eyes. Nancy picked at her salad, rearranging lettuce. You live here alone. I do. That must be. She searched for the word. Quiet, peaceful, I said again. She smiled thinly. Peace can be overrated. Too much quiet and you start hearing things that aren't there. Start talking to yourself. I prefer it to noise that drowns out thinking, Harold snorted. Philosophy. How very retired of you. The insult was gentle, almost playful, but it was an insult nonetheless. I poured more wine and watched the sun sink lower. They didn't see what I saw, the way the light transformed everything it touched, making even weathered wood look sacred. They sat in beauty and saw only discomfort, but that was okay. They would learn. The ocean was patient, so was I. The first week passed in a symphony of small complaints. Harold found fault with everything. The gulls were too loud, like living inside a popcorn machine. The ceiling fan clicked. Sounds like a death rattle. The water pressure was insufficient. The coffee too weak. The silence too heavy. The neighbors too nosy. Nancy's criticisms were subtler, wrapped in concern. Don't you think these curtains might benefit from updating? I'm sure this furniture has sentimental value. You really should consider central air. Window units are so vintage. I absorbed it all with the same grace I'd shown rowdy teenagers. Smiled, nodded, made adjustments where reasonable, held firm where not. But I watched. That's what teachers do. We watch. We see the tells, the cracks in the armor, the moments when the performance falters, and I saw things. Nancy stood at the bedroom window every morning at dawn, staring at the ocean with an expression that wasn't quite longing, but wasn't quite fear either. Something suspended between the two. Harold spent hours on the porch pretending to read the Wall Street Journal, but his eyes kept drifting to where Tom worked on his boat at the pier, hands moving with purpose, whistling old Eagles songs. They were haunted, these two, not by ghosts, but by choices, by years accumulated like dust in corners. No one ever cleans. On Thursday morning, I knocked on Nancy's door with 2 cups of tea. She opened it wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. I thought we could take a walk, I suggested. The beach is beautiful this time of day. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. I'm not really a morning exercise person. Neither am I. But sometimes it's nice to just be somewhere beautiful. She hesitated. I saw the war in her face, the part that wanted to say yes battling the part that had been saying no for so long. It had become reflex. Perhaps another time, she said finally. Of course. But as I turned to leave, she added, Margaret, do you ever feel like you've missed something, some turn you were supposed to take but didn't? I looked back. Her face was carefully neutral, but her hands twisted the robe's belt. Every day, I admitted. But I'm learning that missed turns can become new roads if you're brave enough to walk them. Something flickered in her eyes. Then the mask returned. How poetic. Must be the teacher in you. I smiled and left her to her expensive solitude. That afternoon I baked pies, apple, cherry, pecan, the kitchen filled with cinnamon and butter, smells that turn a house into a home. Nancy appeared in the doorway, drawn by the warmth. You're baking, she observed. For tomorrow night's community dinner, would you like to help? She almost said, No? I could see the refusal forming, but then, I suppose I could. Watch, learn the process. Better yet, you could make one yourself. This crust is forgiving, impossible to ruin. I doubt that. I'm not much of a cook. Neither was I. Once, but kitchens are forgiving places. They reward effort, not perfection. She stepped inside slowly, as if entering sacred space. I handed her an apron. flower stained, well-loved. She put it on with the same careful movements she'd used donning expensive jewelry. We worked in silence at first. I showed her how to cut butter into flour, how to add just enough water. Her hands were elegant but uncertain, unused to creation. I used to cook, she said suddenly. When I was young, before Harold and I married, I loved it. The chemistry of it, the transformation. What changed? We hired staff. Harold said it was beneath me that successful wives didn't do things. They managed people who did things. Her voice was flat. I haven't made a pie in 40 years. That's a long time to go without transformation. She looked at me sharply. Then unexpectedly she laughed. Brief and bitter. You're a strange woman, Margaret Collins. I'll take that as a compliment. The pie came together under her hands, not perfectly. The crust was uneven, the crimping amateur. But it was hers, real. When we slid it into the oven, she stood watching through the glass door like a child waiting for magic. Meanwhile, Harold had abandoned his newspaper. I found him at the window, watching Tom struggle with an outboard motor at the pier. Carburetors flooded. Harold muttered. What? The motor. He's pulling the cord, but it won't catch. Carburetors flooded. Needs to sit for 20 minutes, then try again with the chokeout. You know boats. He turned, almost defensive. I know engines. Built my career in engineering before I moved into management. Used to take things apart, figure out how they worked. His voice carried something I hadn't heard before. Nostalgia. Haven't done that in decades. Tom could probably use the help. He's been fighting with that motor for 3 days. I'm sure he has it under control. But the next morning I found Harold at the pier, sleeves rolled up, working alongside Tom. Their voices carried across the water. Technical talk punctuated by Tom's terrible jokes and Harold's reluctant laughter. When they finally got the motor running, Harold came back with grease on his hands and something like light in his eyes. Fixed it, I asked from the porch. Fixed it. He looked at his dirty hands, and for just a moment I saw not a retired executive, but a young engineer who'd once believed in the beauty of problems solved. That evening we ate Nancy's pie. It was slightly burnt on one edge, the filling too runny, the crust tough in places. It's terrible, Nancy announced, but she was smiling. It's perfect, I countered. Harold took a second slice. As we sat on the porch watching stars emerge, the silence between us was different, lighter, less like judgment, more like possibility. Small changes, I reminded myself. Grain by grain, wave by wave. The ocean was patient. So was I. Friday arrived with clouds that threatened rain but never delivered. I'd been preparing for this all week, not just the food but the orchestration. Mary was bringing her famous apple tart. Tom had caught fresh mackerel that morning. Sophie promised her grandmother's potato salad. The others would fill in the gaps, the way communities do when they trust each other. At 4 o'clock, I announced to Harold and Nancy, "Tonight's the surprise I mentioned." Nancy looked up from her book. She'd been reading more, I'd noticed, real reading, not the performance of it. Should we be worried? Only if you're afraid of good food and better company. Harold appeared from the guest room wearing another suit. What's the dress code? Comfortable? We're eating outside. Outside? Nancy's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. What kind of restaurant? Not a restaurant here. Every Friday, some neighbors and I do a community dinner. Everyone brings a dish. We eat on the beach, watch the sunset. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Nancy found words. You want us to eat with strangers, with friends, I corrected gently. Or future friends, anyway. Margaret, we're not really the potluck type, Harold said, not unkindly. We appreciate the gesture, but perhaps... No pressure, I interrupted. But the food will be here either way. You're welcome to join us or eat inside, whatever feels comfortable. I left them to decide and headed to the beach where Tom was already setting up folding tables. The wind carried the salt-sweet promise of a perfect evening. They coming? Tom asked, hammering a table leg into the sand. We'll see. $10 says they hide inside. I don't take bets I'll lose. But at 6 o'clock, when Mary arrived with her tart and Sophie with her daughter and the others began trickling in, Harold and Nancy appeared on the porch. They'd changed. Nothing casual, but less formal. Nancy wore slacks and a light sweater. Harold had abandoned the suit jacket. They descended the steps like diplomats entering foreign territory. Mary was the first to approach, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be Margaret's guests. I'm Mary. Welcome to our little tradition." Nancy accepted her handshake with the wariness of someone unused to genuine warmth. "Nancy Miller. This is my husband Harold. Tom." The fisherman bounded over, smelling of the sea and engine oil. "Heard you helped me crack that carburetor problem. Saved me $100 at the shop." Harold's discomfort warred with pride. Pride won. It was a simple fix. Basic engineering. Simple for you, maybe. I'd have been yanking that cord till Christmas. Sophie arrived with her son Jackson, a whirlwind of 8-year-old energy. "Is this where the food is? Mom said there'd be cake. Manners." "Jackson," Sophie chided, but she was smiling to Nancy and Harold. "Sorry, he's excited. We don't get out much." More neighbors arrived. Carlos, who taught guitar lessons from his garage. Linda, who painted watercolors and sold them at the boardwalk. Jim and Patricia, married 53 years and still holding hands. The tables filled with food that told stories. Mary's tart spoke of mornings that started at 4 a.m., baking for the farmer's market. Tom's mackerel represented hours on the water. Patience rewarded. Sophie's potato salad carried her grandmother's recipe. Love preserved in mayonnaise and dill. I watched Harold and Nancy navigate this foreign landscape. They sat at the edge of things, polite but separate. Nancy's smile never quite reached her eyes. Harold checked his watch twice. Then Tom told one of his terrible jokes. "Why don't oysters donate to charity?" No one answered. We'd heard them all. "Because they're shellfish." It was awful, groan-inducing, the kind of joke that should die on arrival. But Harold laughed, not a polite chuckle, an actual laugh, surprised out of him. Unguarded, he looked shocked by his own reaction. Tom grinned. "Got another one. What do you call a fish wearing a bow tie?" "Tom, please," Mary protested. "So fish-tie-cated." This time, others groaned and laughed simultaneously, including Nancy, whose smile finally touched her eyes. Carlos pulled out his guitar. "Anyone have requests?" "Something old," Linda suggested, before our time became nobody's time. He played What a Wonderful World, fingers moving across strings like water. His voice was untrained but honest. Others joined in, harmonizing badly, beautifully. Nancy's fingers tapped against her wine glass. Unconscious, rhythmic, her shoulders, rigid all evening, began to lower. Mary asked about her pearl necklace, and Nancy's whole demeanor shifted. "Harold gave it to me on my 30th birthday," she said, touching it like a talisman. "We were different then, young. He was still building the company, working impossible hours, but he'd come home with little surprises, flowers, books, this. He was romantic," Mary said. "He was." Nancy glanced at Harold, who was deep in conversation with Jim about classic cars. We both were, I think, before we forgot how. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose and violet. Jackson chased the receding tide, shrieking with joy. Sophie watched her son with the kind of love that hurts because it's so fierce. "Single parent?" Nancy asked her quietly. 3 years now. His father wasn't. Kind leaving was the right choice. But it's not easy. Nothing worthwhile is. Nancy paused. "I'm sorry. That was presumptuous. I don't know your situation." "No, you're right," Sophie smiled. "Some days are harder than others. But then there are evenings like this, and I remember why I keep going." Nancy was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're very brave." "I'm very tired," Sophie corrected. "But thank you." As darkness fell, someone lit tiki torches. Their flames danced against the growing night. Tom pulled Harold into a debate about the best fishing spots. Mary convinced Nancy to try her recipe for lemon bars. Carlos played Lean on Me, and everyone sang, even those who couldn't carry a tune. I stood back, watching. This was the surprise. Not a revelation, but a reminder that life exists in these small moments. The community isn't built in grand gestures, but in shared meals and terrible jokes and songs sung off-key. Harold caught my eye across the firelight. He raised his glass slightly. Acknowledgement, gratitude, truce. Nancy laughed at something Mary said. A real laugh. The kind that transforms faces. For 3 hours they weren't judging or being judged. They were just people. eating and talking and existing in the warm circle of strangers, becoming friends. When we finally cleaned up, Harold insisted on helping fold tables. Nancy packed leftover food into containers with the efficiency of someone remembering old skills. "Same time next week?" Tom asked. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. As we walked back to the house, Nancy said quietly, "Thank you for tonight." "You're welcome." "I meant it for not letting us refuse," the ocean whispered behind us. Patient and eternal. Small changes, grain by grain. The change came in increments too small to name but too significant to ignore. Nancy started waking before dawn. I'd find her on the porch, coffee cup cradled in both hands, watching the horizon like it held answers to questions she'd stopped asking years ago. On Tuesday morning, I joined her there. We sat in silence for a while, the ocean providing all the conversation we needed. "I dreamed about this once," she said finally. "Living by the sea. I was 19, studying art history at a college I couldn't afford. I'd walk to the beach between classes and imagine a life where I could paint and listen to the waves and not worry about becoming someone." "What happened?" she smiled. But it was the kind of smile that acknowledged defeat. Harold happened in the best way. Don't misunderstand. He was brilliant, ambitious, certain about everything when I was certain about nothing. He saw a future and invited me into it. So I went. "Did you ever paint?" For a while we had a small apartment and I'd set up an easel by the window. Harold would come home from his engineering job covered in grease and blueprints, and I'd show him what I'd been working on. She paused, staring into her coffee. Then the company started growing. We moved to a bigger house, had Olivia, hired staff. Harold said I didn't need to paint anymore. I could buy art instead, better art, from real artists. "And you stopped." "I stopped." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I became someone's wife, someone's mother, someone who hosted dinners and wore the right clothes and said the right things. The paintings went into storage. Eventually, I threw them away. That must have felt like dying." She looked at me sharply. "That's dramatic. Is it when you kill parts of yourself to fit into someone else's vision? What else would you call it?" The wind picked up, carrying spray and salt and the cries of early gulls. Nancy's hands tightened around her cup. "I don't know who I would have been," she admitted. "If I'd stayed, if I'd painted, maybe I wouldn't have been anyone at all. Maybe Harold saved me from wasting my life on impossible dreams. Or maybe you saved him from a life without color." She looked at me then. Really looked, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes, the first real emotion I'd witnessed from her. They didn't fall. She was too practiced at control for that. But they were there, later that morning. I gave her the watercolor set I'd found at a thrift shop. Nothing fancy. Student grade, half the tubes probably dried out. But her hands shook when she accepted it. "I can't," she protested. "You can. Whether you should is a different question, but you can." She disappeared into the guest room with the paints. I didn't see her again until lunch. Meanwhile, Harold was undergoing his own transformation. Tom had mentioned needing help with his boat's hull. Rot had set in, needed replacing. I suggested Harold might enjoy the project. "I'm not a carpenter," he'd objected. "Neither is Tom, but he's willing to learn. Might be nice to build something instead of managing it." The next morning I found them at the pier, wood planks scattered around them like fallen trees. Tom was demonstrating how to measure and cut while Harold listened with the intensity of a student who'd forgotten the joy of not knowing. Over the following days, I'd watch them from my porch. Harold's expensive clothes grew stained with varnish and sweat. His hands, soft from decades of desk work, developed calluses. He'd come home exhausted, smelling of sawdust and accomplishment. "Forgot how much I loved this," he admitted one evening, examining his blistered palms. "Working with my hands, solving real problems, not just shuffling papers and managing egos. Why did you stop?" "Success." He said it like a curse. I was good at engineering, so they promoted me to management. Good at managing, so they made me an executive. Good at that, so I became CEO. Each step took me further from the work I actually loved. He flexed his sore fingers. "Spent 40 years climbing a ladder only to realize it was against the wrong wall. It's not too late to build a new ladder." He smiled, sad, knowing. Maybe not, but it's too late for some things. On Thursday, I found Nancy on the beach with a makeshift easel, a board propped against a chair. She'd attempted a watercolor of the sunrise, all bleeding colors and uncertain lines. It wasn't good, but it was honest. "I'm terrible at this," she said when she noticed me. "You're unpracticed. That's different. I used to be better. I used to see things. Compositions, light, shadow. Now I just see. What's there? Maybe what's there is enough." She laughed, brittle and sharp. "You're full of these little wisdoms, aren't you? Do they teach that in teacher school?" "No, life teaches it, usually through pain." Her brush stilled. "You lost your husband young." "I did. That must have been—" She struggled for words. "Impossible." It was, but I learned something from it. That waiting for the perfect time to live is a trap, because there is no perfect time. There's just now, and what we choose to do with it. Nancy returned to her painting, adding water, watching colors bleed together. "Harold and I have been married 43 years. We've built a good life. Olivia, the business, the house, everything we were supposed to want. But I can't remember the last time he looked at me the way he looked at that boat motor when it finally started." She set down her brush. "I can't remember the last time I felt like a person instead of a role. So become a person again. I don't know how. I've been performing for so long. I'm not sure there's anyone underneath anymore." I sat beside her in the sand, both of us facing the endless ocean. "You're painting," I said simply. "That's how it starts. One small, honest thing at a time." That evening, the house felt different. Harold and Nancy moved through it less like guests and more like residents. Harold helped me prepare dinner, his knife work clumsy but eager. Nancy set the table without being asked, humming something under her breath. We ate together as the sun set, painting the kitchen walls gold. The silence between us was comfortable now, broken only by the sounds of forks and satisfied sighs. "Margaret," Harold said, wiping his mouth, "thank you for this. It's just pasta. You know what I mean." I did, and so did Nancy, whose hand reached across the table to squeeze mine briefly before returning to her wine. Outside, the ocean continued its patient work, reshaping coastlines grain by grain. We were changing too, slowly, inevitably, the way all things do when they stop resisting and finally let themselves be touched by water. 3 weeks had passed since that first uncomfortable dinner. 3 weeks of transformation so gradual, it felt like breathing, necessary, natural, inevitable. Then Olivia's SUV appeared in my driveway like a storm cloud on a clear day. I was in the garden with Nancy, teaching her about the herbs I'd planted. Rosemary, thyme, basil. She'd been sketching them, capturing the way light filtered through leaves. Her drawings were improving, becoming more confident, more her. "Mom, Dad!" We looked up to see Olivia standing at the garden gate, immaculate as always. Designer sunglasses, stiletto heels sinking into my soft earth, phone in hand like a surgical instrument. "Olivia?" Nancy stood quickly, brushing dirt from her jeans. Actual jeans, not the pressed slacks she'd arrived in. "We didn't know you were coming. I wanted to surprise you. Check in, see how you're surviving this. Arrangement." The word hung there, sharp-edged. Harold emerged from the house, wearing one of Tom's old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled up, sawdust in his hair. He looked a decade younger than the man who'd arrived 3 weeks ago. Olivia's mouth actually fell open. "Dad, what are you wearing?" "Clothes," he said mildly. "Come inside. I'll put coffee on." But Olivia didn't move. She was staring at the scene before her, her parents, dirt-stained and relaxed, looking genuinely happy. It clearly wasn't what she'd expected. "What's going on here?" She directed the question at me, not them. "What have you done?" "Made coffee, mostly, and dinner. Sometimes lunch. You know what I mean." Her voice sharpened. "They look different. They look happy," I corrected. Harold put his arm around Nancy's shoulder. Casual, affectionate, the kind of gesture that spoke of rediscovered intimacy. "We've been helping around the neighborhood. I'm rebuilding Tom's boat. Nancy's teaching art to some of the local kids." "You're what?" Olivia removed her sunglasses, as if better vision would make this make sense. "You're teaching, Mom. You don't teach." "I do now," Nancy said quietly. "Every Tuesday and Thursday, the community center lets us use their space. And you didn't think to tell me, either of you." We've been busy, Harold said. Living, you should try it sometime. The barb landed. Olivia's face flushed. Inside, the tension only escalated. Olivia paced my small kitchen like a caged animal, while Harold made coffee with the ease of someone who knew where everything was kept. Mary and Sophie arrived for our afternoon cooking session. We'd been making meals for elderly neighbors. They stopped short at the sight of Olivia. "Oh, we didn't know you had company, Margaret," Mary said. "This is my daughter-in-law, Olivia. Olivia, these are my friends, Mary and Sophie." "Friends?" Olivia repeated flatly. "Of course, how lovely." The contempt in her voice was thin as paper, but just as cutting. Mary and Sophie excused themselves, promising to return later. After they left, Olivia turned on me. "Can we talk?" "Alone." Nancy and Harold exchanged glances but retreated to the porch. In the kitchen, Olivia dropped her pleasant mask entirely. "What are you doing, Margaret?" "I'm not sure what you mean." "This, all of this. Playing house, making my parents into, what? Your charity project. Your way of proving you're not useless after all." The words hit like a slap. I gripped the counter edge. "They seem happy," I said carefully. "They seem deluded. My father is a successful businessman, not a carpenter. My mother has a master's degree, not an art teacher for beach town children." She stepped closer. "You're filling their heads with fantasies about simple living and finding themselves. But this isn't their life. This isn't real. Maybe their old life wasn't real either. Don't," her voice went ice cold. "Don't pretend you understand them better than I do. You've known them 3 weeks. I've known them my entire life." "Have you?" I asked softly. "Or have you known the versions of them that fit your narrative?" Her hand trembled. "You need to stop this. Whatever you're doing, whatever game you're playing, this isn't a game, Olivia." "No!" She pulled out her phone, scrolled, shoved it at me. "Michael sent me this. The property deed, this house, it's in his name. Did you know that?" My stomach dropped. "I thought not," she continued, sensing blood. "See, technically, this isn't even your house, and if I convince Michael that this situation is unhealthy for my parents, that you're manipulating them, that they need to come home, well, we could just sell it. Problem solved." The kitchen tilted. I'd known the house was in Michael's name. For insurance purposes, he'd said, for tax reasons. But I'd paid for it. Every dollar saved over decades of careful budgeting. "You wouldn't," I whispered. "Try me. This ends now. Pack my parents' things. I'm taking them home today." "Olivia?" Harold's voice cracked like thunder. He stood in the doorway, Nancy behind him, both of their faces pale with shock and fury. "How dare you?" he said, each word deliberate and sharp. "How dare you speak to Margaret that way? Dad, you don't understand." "No, you don't understand." He moved into the kitchen, putting himself between Olivia and me. "For 40 years I built empires and forgot how to be human. Your mother became a ghost in our own house. We were successful, respected, miserable. And you know what? We didn't even realize it until we came here. This is temporary insanity. This is the first time in decades I've remembered why I wanted to live." His voice broke. "The first time I've touched your mother and felt anything besides obligation." Nancy stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "You were raised to value achievement over joy. That's our fault. But I won't apologize for finding myself again." "You're choosing her over me," Olivia said. And suddenly she sounded less like an executive and more like a child. "Over your own daughter. We're choosing ourselves," Harold said gently. "For the first time. Can you understand that?" Olivia looked between them, her careful composure cracking. "No, I can't, because I've spent my entire life trying to be what you wanted. Successful, driven, perfect, and now you're telling me it was all worthless." The question hung in the air, raw and terrible. Then she turned and walked out, heels clicking violently against my floor, door slamming behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. The SUV's engine roared, gravel sprayed, then silence. Nancy collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Harold stood frozen, looking older than I'd ever seen him, and I stood there wondering if I'd just destroyed a family while trying to heal one. That night I couldn't sleep. Olivia's words circled my mind like vultures. "This house isn't even yours. I'd paid for it. Every dollar scraped together from 35 years of teaching salaries, but she was right. The deed was in Michael's name. What if she convinced him? What if I lost not just the house, but everything I'd built here? At 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen. Harold was already there, sitting in darkness, staring at nothing. Couldn't sleep either, I asked. Haven't slept properly in years. Too much guilt. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit, please. I made tea. Neither of us wanted, but both of us needed. The ritual of boiling water, steeping leaves. It gave our hands something to do. I'm sorry, I finally said. This is my fault. I shouldn't have. Don't. His voice was firm. Don't apologize for giving us our lives back. I may have cost you your daughter. We cost us our daughter. Nancy and I, years ago. He wrapped his hands around the mug. We raised Olivia to believe that success meant sacrifice, that happiness was what you got after you achieved enough, earned enough, proved enough. We were wrong. Nancy appeared in the doorway, wrapped in one of my old robes. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Is there more tea? I poured her a cup. She sat beside Harold, their shoulders touching, unconscious intimacy that had been absent when they arrived. She'll come around, Nancy said, but she sounded uncertain. Maybe not, Harold replied. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we've spent too long trying to make her comfortable with our choices instead of making the right choices in the first place. But she's our daughter, which is exactly why we need to show her a different way. That it's never too late to choose joy over obligation. That success isn't worth sacrificing your soul. He looked at me. You showed us that, Margaret. You didn't preach. You just lived it. And we remembered what living felt like. A knock on the door startled us all. At 2:30 in the morning, it could only be emergency or trouble. I opened it to find Michael standing on my porch, travel bag in hand, exhaustion written across his face. Michael, what are you? Olivia called me. Told me everything. He stepped inside, and I braced myself for anger, for accusations, for the loss I'd been dreading. Mom, we need to talk. Harold and Nancy tactfully retreated to the guest room. Michael and I sat in the living room, the house settling around us with creaks and whispers. She said you're manipulating her parents, Michael began. That you're playing some kind of revenge game because of what she said about you not doing anything. Michael, let me finish. He held up a hand. She also said her dad stood up to her for the first time in her life, that her mom is painting again, that they look happy. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Is that true? Yes. Then I need to tell you something about the house. My heart sank. Here it came. When you bought this place, you wanted to put it in your name. I convinced you to use mine for insurance purposes, for tax benefits. You trusted me. He pulled out his phone, showed me a document. I had the deed transferred back to your name 2 weeks ago. Retroactive. I was going to surprise you for your birthday, but, he smiled sadly, timing seems important now. The document swam before my eyes. My name, Margaret Ann Collins, sole owner. I don't understand, I whispered. This house was always yours, Mom. Every penny came from your savings. I just held the paperwork for legal reasons. He took my hand. Olivia was wrong about so many things, but especially about this. She can't take it from you. No one can. Tears came then, hot and relieving. Years of holding everything together, of being strong, of never allowing myself to need. It all broke open. I'm sorry, Michael said, that she made you feel like what you do doesn't matter, that your life is somehow less valuable because it's quiet. You taught me everything about being human. You're the strongest person I know. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about not breaking, Mom. It's about breaking and still showing up the next day. You did that for 20 years after Dad died. You're doing it now. He glanced toward the guest room. And apparently, you're teaching Harold and Nancy to do it too. I didn't mean to cause problems with Olivia. Olivia's problems started long before this. She's been running from herself for years, hiding behind work and achievement and control, he sighed. I've watched her disappear into that life. I've tried to talk to her about it. But sometimes people need to hit bottom before they're ready to climb. And if she doesn't come around, then she doesn't. But Harold and Nancy have a right to their own choices. And you, he squeezed my hand, you have a right to live here, in peace, without fear. This is your home, legally, morally, in every way that matters. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable quiet that only exists between people who truly know each other. Finally, Michael stood. I need to get back to the kids. But I wanted you to know about the house, about how much you matter." He kissed my forehead. "Keep doing what you're doing. I think it's exactly what everyone needs." After he left, I returned to the kitchen to find Harold and Nancy waiting, anxious and awake. "Everything okay?" Nancy asked. I showed them the document, explained what Michael had said. Harold's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank God I was prepared to fight her, you know. Legally, if necessary. This is where we want to be." "You're sure?" I asked. "This could cost you your relationship with Olivia." "It could," Nancy agreed. "But staying in a life that was killing us slowly would cost us everything, including each other." She took Harold's hand. "We're choosing life, Margaret, whatever that means." We sat together as dawn approached. 3 people who'd each lost their way and somehow found it again in a small beach house where the coffee was weak and the furniture was old, but the love was real. Outside, the ocean continued its eternal work. Inside, we were learning to do the same, slowly, patiently, one wave at a time. 2 days passed without word from Olivia. Harold tried calling. Nancy sent texts that went unanswered. Michael reported that she was processing, but wouldn't talk to anyone. I went through the motions, cooking, cleaning, tending my garden. But guilt sat heavy on my chest. Had I broken something that couldn't be fixed? On the 3rd morning, I found Nancy on the beach before dawn, staring at the gray water. "I keep thinking about all the ways I failed her," she said, without preamble. "The recitals I missed because Harold had a work dinner. The times she wanted to talk and I was too busy being the perfect corporate wife. The way I taught her that feelings were inconvenient and success was everything. You were doing your best with what you knew." "My best wasn't good enough." Her voice cracked. "She learned to be hard because we were hard. She learned to sacrifice herself because we sacrificed ourselves. And now she's trapped in the same prison we just escaped from. Then maybe watching you be free will show her there's another way. Or maybe she'll just hate us for choosing it." I had no answer for that. Some things we can't fix with wisdom or good intentions. Some things just have to hurt until they heal. That afternoon, while Harold and Tom worked on the boat and Nancy taught her art class, I went to the farmer's market. Mary was there setting up her booth. "How are they doing?" she asked, arranging pies. "Harold and Nancy. Better than their daughter, probably." She nodded knowingly. "Sometimes the people we love can't celebrate our growth because it reminds them they're standing still. Give her time." But time, I was learning, didn't always fix things. Sometimes it just gave wounds space to either heal or fester. I was selecting tomatoes when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Margaret," I turned. Olivia stood there and I almost didn't recognize her. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, jeans and a t-shirt instead of her usual designer armor. She looked younger, more vulnerable and utterly exhausted. "Olivia, can we—" She gestured vaguely. "Can we talk, please?" We walked to the beach, the same beach where everything had begun to shift. The morning was cool, clouded, the ocean restless for a long time. Neither of us spoke. Then Olivia's composure shattered. "I'm so tired, Margaret. I'm so goddamn tired." The words came like a flood. The 70-hour work weeks, the guilt of barely seeing her children, the marriage that felt more like a business partnership, the constant pressure to achieve more, earn more, be more, the way she'd internalized her parents' values so completely that she'd forgotten to ask if she even believed in them. "I envied you," she admitted, tears streaming. "When I said you didn't do anything, I meant you didn't have to prove yourself constantly. You just existed, and I hated you for it because I didn't know how to do that. I still don't. So learn. How?" She laughed bitterly. "I'm 42 years old. I've built my entire life around achievement. My identity is my job title. If I'm not the successful executive who has it all together, then who am I? That's the question, isn't it?" I sat on the sand, and after a moment she joined me. "The scary, necessary question. Who are you when you strip away all the roles and titles and accomplishments?" "I don't know." And that terrifies me. It should. That's how you know you're asking the right question. We watched the waves crash and retreat, crash and retreat. The ocean's endless lesson in persistence and surrender. "My parents look happy," Olivia said quietly. "Genuinely happy. I haven't seen them look at each other like that since I was a child. It made me so angry." "Why?" "Because—" She struggled for words. because I've been trying to make them proud my entire life, built the career they wanted, married the right man, had the perfect kids, did everything according to their blueprint, and then they come here and discover that none of it mattered, that happiness was just deciding to live differently. It matters, I said gently. Everything you've built matters, but maybe it matters to them differently now. Maybe they see you working yourself to death and recognize themselves, and it breaks their hearts. She was quiet for a long time. Then, when I was 8, my mom used to paint. She'd set up in the garden and I'd sit beside her, and she'd let me mix colors. I loved those afternoons. But then Dad's company grew, and Mom stopped painting. She said we couldn't afford distractions. I remember thinking, I'll never let anything distract me either. I'll be successful like Dad, focused like Mom. I'll do it right. And you've done everything right. Then why does it feel so wrong? A figure appeared down the beach, Nancy walking toward us with hesitant steps. When she saw Olivia, she stopped, uncertain. Olivia stood for a moment. I thought she might run, but instead, she walked toward her mother. They met in the middle of the sand. I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw Nancy's arms open, saw Olivia collapse into them, saw 2 generations of women who'd forgotten how to be vulnerable, finally remembering how to hold each other. Harold appeared next, drawn by some parental instinct. He enveloped both of them, and they stood there, a family reshaping itself in the salt air. I turned away, giving them privacy. Some moments are too sacred for witnesses. When I returned home, I found them in my kitchen, all 3 of them, making dinner together. Olivia was chopping vegetables with the focused intensity she probably brought to boardroom presentations. Nancy was teaching her how to make pie crust. Harold was telling a story about his first engineering failure, laughing at himself in a way I'd never heard. "Margaret," Nancy waved me in, "we're making your favorite chicken pot pie." "Stay," Olivia said, not looking up from her cutting board. "Please, I'd like you to stay." So I did. We cooked together, the 4 of us, in a kitchen barely big enough for 2. We got in each other's way, laughed at mistakes, ate samples straight from the pan. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. After dinner, Olivia and I did dishes while Harold and Nancy took a walk on the beach. "I'm sorry," Olivia said, hands deep in soapy water, "for threatening you, for saying those terrible things, for being exactly the kind of person I never wanted to become. You were scared. I was cruel. Sometimes they're the same thing." She handed me a plate to dry. "I'm going to make changes, cut back my hours, spend more time with my kids, maybe even," she laughed, embarrassed, "maybe even pick up painting again. Mom's going to teach me." That sounds wonderful. It sounds terrifying. What if I'm bad at it? What if I hate having unstructured time? What if I don't know who I am outside of work? Then you'll figure it out. That's what this time is for. Figuring things out, not having all the answers. She nodded. Thoughtful then. "Will you teach me how you do this, living without fear, being okay with quiet, finding peace in ordinary things?" "I'm still learning myself," I admitted. "But yes, I'll teach you what I can." We finished the dishes in comfortable silence. Outside, twilight was painting the sky in shades of forgiveness. Olivia stayed for 5 days. Not the 5 days of a obligatory visit, but 5 days of actual presence. She turned off her phone for hours at a stretch, something Michael said she'd never done. She helped Mary at the farmer's market, spent an afternoon learning to fish with Tom, joined Nancy's art class, and discovered she had her mother's eye for color. On the 3rd day, she brought her children, Emma, 7, and Lucas, 9. I watched her teach them to collect shells, patient and unhurried in a way she probably hadn't been since they were born. The guilt was still there. I could see it in her eyes when they asked why she'd never brought them here before, but she was learning to carry it differently. "You don't erase past mistakes," Nancy told her one evening, as they painted together on the porch. "You make better choices moving forward. That's all any of us can do." Harold had become a fixture at Tom's pier, mentoring a group of young men who were trying to start a fishing co-op. He taught them about business structures and loan applications, but also about following joy instead of just profit. The executive who'd once measured success in quarterly earnings now measured it in sustainable living and community impact. Nancy's Tuesday and Thursday art classes had expanded. She'd started a program for underprivileged kids, teaching them that creativity wasn't a luxury, but a necessity. Everyone deserves beauty, she told me. Everyone deserves to make something with their own hands. The Friday sunset dinner had become legendary. 20 people showed up, then 30. Someone brought a grill. Carlos brought his whole guitar group. Children played tag while adults talked and laughed and shared food that tasted like home. On Olivia's last evening, she helped me prepare food for the gathering. The kitchen was crowded with women. Mary, Sophie, Nancy, and now Olivia, all chopping and stirring and telling stories. "This is nice," Olivia said, and there was wonder in her voice. Just being, not producing anything, not achieving anything, just existing with people. "You're producing plenty," Sophie countered, gesturing to the mountain of food. "You're just producing community instead of quarterly reports." Olivia laughed. Real laughter. The kind that comes from deep in the chest. I think I've forgotten the difference. That evening, as the sun painted the sky impossible colors, Olivia stood to speak. The crowd quieted. I don't usually do this. Public speaking terrifies me, which is ironic given my job. Nervous laughter. But I wanted to say thank you to all of you for reminding my family what actually matters, for showing me that it's never too late to choose differently. She looked at me. "Margaret, when you agreed to take in my parents, I thought I was dumping a problem on someone who had nothing better to do. I was wrong about so many things. You weren't idle. You were living, and you taught them. And now me, what that actually means." She pulled an envelope from her pocket. "I wrote this earlier. I was going to give it to you privately, but I think it needs to be said out loud." She unfolded a paper and read, "Thank you for reminding me that family isn't about who's in charge, but about who cares. The success isn't measured in achievements but in joy, that my parents' happiness matters more than my pride, that I can choose differently starting now." Her voice broke. Nancy stood and embraced her. Harold joined them and I watched from the edges, marveling at the transformation that had bloomed in my small beach house. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the children had been carried home sleepy and sandy, Olivia found me washing dishes. "I'm going to make real changes," she said. "Not just talk about them. I'm cutting my hours, hiring help, making time for Emma and Lucas, for Michael, for myself. Good. And I'm coming back. Once a month at least. The kids love it here. I love it here." She dried a plate, thoughtful. "Maybe we'll even buy a place nearby, something small, a weekend house. I'd like that." She hugged me then, unexpected and fierce. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on us." I never did. After she left the next morning, tearful goodbyes and promises to call, the house felt different, not empty but full in a new way. Harold and Nancy had decided to stay, not as guests, but as residents. They'd found a small cottage 3 streets over, close enough to be part of the community, but far enough for independence. Harold was already planning renovations, Nancy already imagining a studio with north-facing light. "We'll still come to the Friday dinners," Nancy assured me as we walked the beach one morning. "And you're welcome at our place anytime. Maybe you could teach me to bake." "I'd love that." She squeezed my hand. "You gave us our lives back, Margaret. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You already have by choosing to live them." Months passed. The rhythm of the beach became the rhythm of my life. Tides and seasons, and the slow, sacred work of community building. Michael visited more often, bringing the grandchildren. They loved their grandmother's art classes and their grandfather's boat-building projects. They loved running wild on the sand, in a way city children rarely get to. Olivia came monthly, as promised, sometimes with the family, sometimes alone, learning to be still, to be uncertain, to be human instead of perfect. The house continued to fill with life. Tom taught me to fish. Mary and I started a small catering business for beach weddings. Sophie's son called me Grandma Margaret, and I didn't correct him one evening. Almost a year after that first phone call, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of redemption. Harold and Nancy walked hand in hand on the beach. Tom was showing a group of kids how to cast nets. Mary's laughter drifted from somewhere down the street. My phone buzzed, a text from Olivia. "Emma wants to know if we can come for 2 weeks this summer. She says she needs beach time for her soul." I think she's onto something. I smiled and typed back. The door is always open, and it was. For family, for friends, for anyone who needed reminding that it's never too late to choose joy over obligation, connection over achievement, living over merely existing. I'd come to this house seeking solitude. I'd found something better, harmony. The ocean had taught me its most important lesson, that transformation doesn't happen through force, but through patience, through showing up day after day, wave after wave, until even the hardest stones become smooth. I'd been that wave for Harold and Nancy. They'd been that wave for Olivia. And now, together, we were reshaping the coastline of our family, grain by grain, choice by choice. The gulls called out their evening song. The waves whispered their eternal promise. And I, Margaret Collins, 63 years old and finally truly alive, whispered back a promise of my own, to keep showing up, to keep choosing love over fear, to keep proving that the greatest adventures often begin when we stop running and finally allow ourselves to come home, not to a place, but to ourselves and to each other. The sunset faded to dusk. The stars began their slow emergence. Tomorrow would bring new tides, new challenges, new opportunities for grace. But tonight was perfect, exactly as it was. And so was I.